Hey everybody, it's good to be with you again. Today we're talking about the Great Depression. We talked about World War I last time and the end of World War I. We talked about the Treaty of Versailles. We talked about how things were wrapping up. Um, just to give you a lowdown, today we're talking about what caused the Great Depression. What does the post-World War I economic world look like? What is the Great Depression? How did it start? And what are its effects on the European countries, both the East and the West? Tonight, you guys are reading on Soviet experiment, 872 to 878. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Lenin, the death of Lenin, some of his economic policies. We'll talk about Stalin. It's some good stuff. Of course, that's not due till Friday. Remember that tomorrow is a PD day, and so tomorrow you do not have school. I guess this is school now. So no homework due tomorrow. Next homework is going to be due on Monday. All right, let's get down to it. So for starts, why are these successor states so upset? So the successor states are the states, those are the countries that we call, is what we call the countries that came after Austria-Hungary, the German Empire, and the Russian Empire broke up. So there'd be states like Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, let's see, and some of the Balkan countries like Yugoslavia, and of course Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Austria. And so I brought out this map to give us an idea of what this all looks like. So this is Czechoslovakia in 1930. And so this kind of illustrates what everybody is talking about. You can see here that we've got, the pink is the Czechs. These are the Bohemians that we talked about back in, like, remember, if you remember the defenestration of Prague, this is the same people group. I know, right? Defenestration of Prague, going way back. But within the borders of Czechoslovakia, you've got a sizable German population here on the border. Down here, you've got the Slovaks. So again, even they are a separate people group from the Czechs. But down here in the very edges of Czechoslovakia, I guess this would be the far east, you've got Ukrainians. And then down here on the border, you've got Hungarians. And of course, within Hungary, you've got Czechs and Slovaks who live there. And so this is one of the big problems with nation states, is that people don't necessarily hold true to the boundaries that you give them. We just saw this with the Treaty of Lausanne just yesterday, when we talked about the end of World War I and the fact that Turks had to leave the Balkan areas and Greeks had to leave Turkey. So without this so-called ethnic cleansing, you don't get clean borders. And so a lot of groups are upset because they feel like they deserve more. Germany clearly thinks that it deserves more. Hungary thinks that it deserves more. Ukraine thinks that it deserves this territory here, so that, in their minds, all the people who live there are in their proper place. But of course, if you were to extend the borders of Hungary out to here, then you'd still end up with a bunch of Czechs and Slovaks who are in Hungary. So a lot of people leave the Treaty of Versailles upset, as we've seen before. The US is super supportive of Germany paying reparations to Britain and France, because the US had lent a lot of money to the British and the French. And here in the US, we get paid. All right, that's one of our mottos, is welcome to the US, we get paid. And so they had lent a huge sum of money to the French and the British during World War I. And so they want that back with interest. The US wanted or saw the opportunity and saw a huge, wonderful investment here. Some people even argued that the reason the US gets involved in the war is not because of unrestricted submarine warfare. It's not because of the Zimmerman Note. It's because of this. It's because US banks, who controlled a lot of the finances of the United States, who controlled a lot of the finances of the big politicians at the time, wanted their money back. And so the politicians at the time were basically wanting to get involved on the French and British side, because they wanted to make sure the French and the British won so they could pay back the US. And so the French and the British can't afford to do this without Germany paying its reparations. Remember, those reparations, that's the money that Germany owes the British and the French for the war. The idea is that the Germans caused the war, and so the British and the French say, you owe us money for the damages. Of course, the Germans really don't like this, but they don't really have much of a choice. In 1923, France says Germany's not paying its share of the reparations appropriately, and so it invades what's called the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr is a heavily industrialized area of Germany. Of course, then the Germans, they stand up against the French. They say, look, you occupy the Ruhr, we're not going to work. And so what you see is a general strike in the area. So the French then import people into the Ruhr Valley to run the machines, to run the coal mines, to run the iron mines, to try to get Germany's money. Is it worth it? I don't know. That's a good question. Sort of. That's a good question. I'm glad I wrote it. Sort of worth it. I mean, Germany does pay, right? And that was sort of the point. However, it really cost the French in a lot of different ways. One, it cost them in terms of prestige with Britain. The British look at what the French are doing, and they're really not okay with this. And so the British begin to distance themselves from the French again. Number two, it led to inflation in France. It cost a lot of money to invade the Ruhr Valley and to pump those French workers over to the German, over across the German border. And so we'll get a ton of inflation in France. We get even worse inflation in Germany. It's called hyperinflation, to help fund the strikers, because they see here, this here is a German poster. Says nine. I can't read the bottom. Says, no, you will not subdue me. And so to help these German workers who are on strike and therefore not getting paid, the German government decides that they need to help pay these workers. And so what do? Well, some guy goes down to the basement and he goes over to the big money printing machine, and he sees that there's a big lever on the side, and every time he pulls the lever, another Deutschmark comes out. And so he's like, well, this is the answer to our problem. And so they just start pulling the lever, pumping the money out, cranking the money out. And of course, as the supply of money goes up, the cost of money goes down. The ability for you to what you can buy for the same amount of money decreases. And so this leads to what we call hyperinflation in Weimar Germany. And this absolutely wrecks the economy. Here you've got some kids down here playing with these giant blocks, which are all just bricks of cash. I don't know if you can see that, but these are Deutschmarks, and they're essentially worthless. This woman over here, it actually would be more expensive for her to go out and buy wood to heat her furnace, and so she just burns straight cash, shoving it right into the furnace. These kids over here have done something rather inventive and made a kite out of their Deutschmarks. Again, the number of Deutschmarks that are used to make this kite here is probably less than it would have cost to actually just buy a kite. And so the Germans experience what's called hyperinflation. This hyperinflation is really only stopped by what we call the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan is a US plan to give loans to Germany so that Germany can make its reparations payments. And so this little chart here, this might be something good to add to your notes. The Dawes Plan, feel free to pause the video whenever you like and take down the notes if you want. The Dawes Plan is this idea that guarantees the US gets paid twice. So the US, remember, gives loans to Germany, props up the German economy. Germany starts making money again. That's great. Germany takes that money, pays the Allies their reparations payments, and the Allies, they pay the US loans from World War I back. This is great. Now, of course, as it says right here, this is $2.5 billion in loans. And so the US is getting its interest, its money and its interest back from the Allies, but the US also expects that eventually, who's going to pay them back? That's right, the Germans. And so the US, they see this as a wonderful way to make a load of cash. And this inextricably ties the US economy to the Allies and to the Germans. Cue the ominous music. I don't know how to make ominous music on this video yet, but when I figure it out, there'll be ominous music. Womp, 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 there's your ominous music. How did the Great Depression in the US spread to Europe? That was what the ominous music was for. The Great Depression starts in the US, and we'll get into the causes of the Great Depression here in just a second. But when the US experiences financial turmoil, the US banks begin to look less outward and more inward. And so the US stops making loans out to Europe to prop up these European economies and these European businesses. And so the investment in Europe decreases. And so these European countries and companies that had been reliant on US loans no longer have them. And so US country or European countries and European businesses begin to feel the crunch from the Great Depression. And then you see a lot of the problems that caused the Great Depression in the US also applied to Europe. So let's get into that. Actually, let's come back to 6. Let's do 7 first, and then we'll come back to 6. So 7 says, why are farmers not buying industrial goods? Well, it's really a cause and effect thing. This probably should be a flow chart, but instead I've done this. So again, I'm going to move my head. Ooh, that feels weird. And I'm going to let you guys be able to take this down if you want to. So number 1, better technology in farming. We get better reapers, we get better harvesters, we get better seed, we get better fertilizers, and so farmers are making more, way more than they actually need to make. And we call this overproduction. This overproduction, of course, is going to lead to a drop in crop prices because, as we've said multiple times, when the amount of something goes up, the price of it goes down. And so you see overproduction lead to a drop in crop prices. These farmers, so the way farming works then and even now, farmers will take out loans at the start of each season. And these loans will help them pay for fuel for the tractors, seed that they're going to plant. It'll help them pay for any farm hands. It'll basically help fund their season. And then at the end of the season, after the harvest, they bring in the harvest, they sell their crops, and they use that money to pay off their loan. And anything that's left over is what they will then keep for themselves as their profit to either reinvest into the farm or to buy whatever they need. And so what happens when you make a loan at the beginning of the season and crops are high, and you have to pay that loan at the end of the season when prices are low? It means that you sometimes end up short on your loan. And what that means is that banks will repossess things. And what a lot of farmers will put up as collateral is their farm. And so farmers can't make the loan payments, so banks repossess their farms. Now, banks don't want farms, banks want money. And so what they're going to do is they're going to try to turn around and sell that farm to try to make up some of their money. But in an era like the Great Depression or the Great Recession that we recently went through, you have a lot of people who don't have a lot of money. And so nobody's going to buy the farm. And so what you end up with is banks begin to close. And then you end up with a bunch of, when banks close, sometimes they take people's savings with them. And so people begin to lose their savings. And so people have even less money. We'll get back to that. So that's another whole cycle. But as far as farmers not having enough money to pay their loans, it means they also can't buy stuff. Even if they make their loans, they barely have anything left. And so they can't go out and buy things like cars or machines or refrigerators or whatever. Do they have refrigerators? I think refrigerators were just coming out. Anyway, so these industrial workers, these industrial workers are making more money, which means that even prices of machines are going up, of industrial goods, industrially made goods are going up. And so farmers can't afford the industrial goods. And so what you see is just general overproduction. There's more stuff than there is demand. And so the stuff just sits there. Because if you're a factory and you can't make more stuff, then, or sorry, if you're a factory and you can't sell the stuff you have, you're not going to make more stuff. I'm sorry, my phone rang. And so if you're not going to make more stuff, do you need those workers? No. Right? And so factories begin to lay off workers. And so now you've got a group of people who are unemployed, not making any money. And if those people aren't making any money, are they going to buy stuff? No. And so factories have even more stuff, and there are even more people who can't afford things. So what do the factories do? Well, they might lay off their entire workforce. And so now we've got a ton of people who are unemployed who still can't buy stuff. And so you can see how the Great Depression becomes this big cycle that feeds on itself. As unemployment goes up, demand goes even further down. What you really need is demand to go up, because if demand goes up, then people will start buying stuff. And if people start buying stuff, you got to start making stuff. And if you got to start making stuff, you got to start hiring people, and then you get a cycle going up. Instead, you get the depression is just a cycle going down, like some sort of toilet, going down a big cycle. Before we get to Irish independence, let's go back to number 6. This is one of the biggest questions in today's reading, so you need this one. How does the Great Depression affect how people saw their government? Well, it depends. I'm going to move my head again. Woo, that feels weird. So people in Central and Eastern Europe had never had liberal government before. They had only ever had kings or princes or emperors, right? Russia had had the Romanovs for like 700 years. The Germans had had princes and kings for hundreds of years. The Austrians, the Habsburgs, had been around since the 1300s, right? Like these people who had been in these 3 empires had never had any sort of representative government, and so this is their first time they were ever able to have like some sort of representative liberal government was in the 20s. And just 10 years after that, the Great Depression hit. And so these people, they start freaking out. They start thinking to themselves, what are we going to do? We got to change something. And up to this point, the king had always like stepped in and like done stuff. And people hadn't really been responsible for what they needed to do. And so nobody really had any ideas. And so what you have is a bunch of people who want somebody to do something. But typically liberal governments are not set up to be quick, right? Even our government is not set up to be quick, unless it really puts a mind to it. It's designed to be slow on purpose so that everybody has input. And so people begin to blame their new liberal governments. They begin to lose faith in their new liberal governments and their democracies and their republics. And they're more and more drawn to authoritarian governments. And this is eventually going to lead down a really, really bad path, right? And by authoritarian governments, if you're keeping track, we're in the 1930s. Authoritarian government means fascism. It means communism. It means Nazism. And so that's where we're headed with all this. All right, let's get into the wrapping up phase. How did Ireland get its independence? They fought for it. Civil War. From 1919 to 1921, the Irish fight for their rights. Here we got a British tank in the streets of an Irish city. These are members of the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. You might still hear about things about the IRA today, though nowadays they're considered a splinter terrorist group, and the real IRA disbanded in the 90s. The 1990s, I'm talking like 25 years ago, okay? And so the Irish Republican Army is something that was still around even when I was growing up. And we'll get more into that later, I hope. The British, so let's talk about the effects of the Great Depression. We see in Eastern Europe, we see people start to turn toward authoritarianism. In Western Europe, we start to see these are the people who have always had, or sorry, not always, but have had Republican governments, liberal governments, much more recently, and they trust their governments. And so what you see is you start to see in the British national government and the French Popular Front, we see a liberal style of government responding to the needs of the people. These are unity governments. In the British national government, we've got the Liberals, the Labour, and the Conservatives working together to try to fix the problems that show up after the crisis of World War I. In France, we've got the Popular Front. Now, this is still a unity government, but it's mostly a unity government of the left. It is socialists, it is communists, and it is radicals forming a government because they see the rising popularity of the ultra-nationalists, of the fascists. And so the left steps in to take control of the government because they understand, and you can see these numbers here, if they all band together, they have a clear majority. If they don't, it's a lot sketchier. And so this is really the first time that you see the communists joining the socialists in France. Remember, communists don't really like socialism. They don't really like the labor union movement because they see it as half measure. But in France, the communists finally relent and they join up with the rest of the left. Not for very long, but long enough to prevent a fascist takeover, a conservative takeover of the French government. And this illustrates something, right? These people, especially in France, these leftists are willing to put aside their leftedness, like their socialism and their communism, to help the people. The conservatives and the liberals and the labor in Britain are willing to put aside their differences because they understand that the people need them. And so what we see is a responsive liberal government in Western Europe, and a draw to authoritarianism in Eastern government. And you know what that means. This is a great opportunity for graphic organizer. I'm just going to flip my head up here. Cool. So overall political outcome of the Great Depression. Countries with experience and trust in liberalism, Western Europe and the US, stay that way. In Britain, you got the National Front. In France, you got the populist or the Popular Front. In the US, you get FDR, and FDR gets elected 4 times. So the people were willing to make him president for 16 years. Now he does die before he can really take office in 45. But this is representative government. I mean, people choose it, but it's also, I mean, he's there for a really long time. After his death, they do make it a constitutional amendment. You can only serve 2 consecutive terms. And then you got newer democracies. Those in Central and Western Europe, just imagine that there's a closed bracket there. They mostly fail. In Italy, you see fascism rise in Benito Mussolini. We won't see him on Monday, but we'll see him on Tuesday. Germany, you see a type of fascism called Nazism rise up. This is Adolf Hitler. We're going to talk about that on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and for a few days after that. Now, fascism is a far-right political militant movement. It emphasizes extreme loyalty to the state, so extreme nationalism and unquestioned obedience to the leader. In Italy, they call it Il Duce. In Germany, they call him the Führer. Whatever the leader says is what happens. And so now we start to see the far right. Far right no longer means bring back the king, bring back the monarchy. It means bring back an authoritarian form of government. And the beginnings of, and we'll start to see totalitarianism as well. In Eastern Europe, you see tons of dictatorships rise up. People don't want to be a part of the answer. They want the answers given to them. Except Czechoslovakia. Good on you, Czechoslovakia. You get to be a republic for now, until the Nazis. It's a story. All right, so that is the end of this lecture, the end of this discussion. If you got any questions, hit me up on Remind, hit me up on Classroom. Feel free to email me, whatever y'all need to do. The next reading is for Monday, the Soviet experiment. So please take care of that over the weekend. Hey, if you haven't answered that poll that I sent out on Classroom, would you please? It's got some good feedback in there that I think will help make the class a little bit better. So if you could give me your opinion, I'll try to make this this online thing that we're doing now just a little bit better if I can. All right, thanks so much, and I'll see you guys soon. Stay safe, wash your hands. Bye.